Imagine a man is just completely sawed in half, like directly down the middle from head to toe.
Yeah, which is an incredibly brutal image to start with, I know.
Right, but it gets wilder.
Yeah.
The tyrant who ordered the execution, he casually walks between the two severed halves of this body. He snaps his fingers, and he brings the man completely back to life.
Just casually resurrects him on the spot.
Exactly. And he looks at this resurrected believer and asks, now do you believe I am God? And the believer just looks back at him entirely unfazed and says, no, now I am absolutely certain you are the imposter.
It's such a cinematic moment.
It really is. And welcome to another deep dive. Today we're basically standing at the absolute epicenter of the cosmic battlefield.
We really are.
We are bypassing the standard maps and coordinates, and we're digging into this massive stack of classical texts, works from medieval scholars like Ibn Asakir and al-Suyuti. And these texts detail the prophets and virtues of the Levant.
And, just to clarify for everyone listening, when we say the Levant in this historical context, we're talking about historical Sham,
Right.
which today encompasses Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine. And to really grasp what these medieval scholars were doing, you kind of have to, throw away your modern understanding of geography.
Totally.
In these sources, the Levant is not just a passive physical location on a map. It's an active, hypersensitive participant in human history.
Yeah, and that's our mission today. We really want to unpack how these texts operate.
Yeah.
Because they don't just give us, dry theology.
Far from it, yeah.
They give us gritty survival logistics, these intense true crime sting operations, and literal cinematic apocalyptic warfare. I mean, they force you to look at the ground you walk on and ask what it remembers.
They absolutely do.
Okay, let's unpack this by looking at a specific physical anchor that comes up repeatedly in these texts, and that is Mount Kazim.
Right, the mountain overlooking Damascus.
Exactly. It's this seemingly unassuming mountain, but the text just piles so much onto it.
What's fascinating here is that Mount Kazim operates as what we might call a geological ledger in the classical Islamic consciousness.
A geological ledger. I like that phrase.
Yeah, because if you look at Ibn Asakir's History of Damascus, which, by the way, is this monumental, multi-volume biographical dictionary of the city, it piles an almost impossible amount of historical weight onto this single elevation.
It's dense.
Very dense. According to the traditions he compiles, the slopes of Kazim are the exact site where Cain killed Abel.
The first murder.
Exactly.
Which is just, it's the absolute 0 point of human morality, right?
Right.
It's where human blood first contaminated the soil. Logically, you would assume classical texts would designate that as cursed earth, like a spiritual exclusion zone or something.
You'd think so, yeah. But instead, the texts immediately layer ultimate sanctity right over that ultimate sin.
It's such a wild pivot.
It really is.
Yeah.
The western base of this very same mountain is cited as the birthplace of Abraham. And then the texts go on to claim Jesus and Mary sought refuge from persecution on its slopes. The prophet Elias hid there from an oppressive king. God is even said to have spoken directly to the mountain.
So it's not cursed at all. It becomes this ultimate sanctuary.
Exactly. It completely rewrites the real estate, spiritually speaking.
That juxtaposition is staggering to me. I mean, if you are living in medieval Damascus, you look out your window and you literally see this mountain every single day.
Right. It dominates the skyline.
And it holds the trauma of the first murder. But the text explicitly states that anyone who prays at Mount Kazim will not be turned away. The veil between heaven and earth there is just like paper thin.
Yeah, it creates a really fascinating psychological environment for the inhabitants. You're navigating a landscape of constant cosmic consequence.
Every step is heavy.
Exactly. And this physical intimacy with the divine leads us to this textual anomaly regarding Abraham 1 that actually locates the genesis of human empathy in a cave in this very region.
Oh man, I read the notes on this story and it completely subverted my expectations. So Abraham is out wandering the peaks around Jerusalem, right? He's searching for grazing land.
Right, a very mundane task.
Yeah, and he hears this voice praising God. So he follows it and he discovers a cave. But the inhabitant isn't human-sized. The text is highly specific here. He finds an 18-cubit-tall man.
Which is massive.
That is roughly 27 feet.
Yeah, it's a relic of a completely bygone era. He's this solitary giant who has basically outlived his entire society. The text says he survives on a cache of dates that he gathers in the summer just to last him through the winter.
So he's completely isolated.
Completely. And the physical scale of the man, the 27 feet, it's meant to invoke awe, But the classical authors use this giant to explore a deeply vulnerable theological problem.
Right, because Abraham starts talking about the day of judgment,
Yeah.
and the giant is terrified of it. So Abraham suggests, hey, let's pray together for protection.
And the giant's response is so telling.
Yeah, he outright refuses. He tells Abraham, what good is my prayer? I have had a prayer stuck in heaven, just totally unanswered, for 3 years.
We have to analyze what the classical scholars are doing here, because they are utilizing the figure of Abraham to address this universal, agonizing human experience of the unanswered plea.
The feeling of just total divine abandonment.
Precisely. Everyone has felt that.
And Abraham's response is a complete psychological reframing of that silence. He asks the giant, if he wants to know why his prayer has been delayed.
The giant, of course, does.
And Abraham explains that when God deeply loves someone, he intentionally delays answering their prayers because he literally loves to hear their voices. He desires the ongoing intimacy of that reliance.
It's a very intense concept of love.
Yeah, and conversely, Abraham says that when someone God dislikes makes a request, he grants it quickly just to be rid of them, to end the interaction.
It completely dismantles our standard human expectation of transaction. Because, in human terms, if you ask for something and I give it to you immediately, it signals respect
Right.
or affection.
Yeah, if I ask for a favor and you do it right away, I feel valued.
Exactly. But if I ignore you, it signals rejection. The text argues here that divine logic is the exact inverse of human logic. The silence is not a void. The silence is actually a request to stay in the room.
Okay, I understand the theological beauty of that. It's profound reframing. But let me push back on this a little bit. Practically speaking, doesn't that just turn divine love into like a hostage situation?
That's a very modern way to read it, but I see your point.
It's almost like a parent holding onto a child's hand a little longer before giving them what they want just to keep the connection. But if you are the one in the cave, right, waiting 3 years in total isolation, being told, hey, your suffering is actually a compliment, is a remarkably tough pill to swallow.
It really is. It is a brutal reality of the ascetic path that these texts often champion. But the narrative tension does break beautifully in this story.
It does, yeah.
Abraham asks the giant what he has been praying for all this time. And the giant explains that 3 years prior, he saw a young man passing through with a massive flock of sheep. He was told the flock belonged to Abraham, the friend of God.
Right.
So for 3 years, he has prayed solely for the chance to meet this friend of God before he dies.
And Abraham just says, I am Abraham, your prayer is answered.
The payoff is incredible.
And the giant's reaction is what makes this a massive cultural leap, I think. Because the text specifically notes that the giant and Abraham embrace. And it claims this was the very first time humans ever hugged.
Which is a huge detail.
Yeah, prior to this, the standard greeting was prostration-like, physically bowing down to the ground.
Think about the mechanics of a bow, though. Prostration is inherently hierarchical. It establishes subservience and a really clear power dynamic. You lower yourself to elevate the other person.
Yeah, it's all about status.
But an embrace. A hug requires both individuals to stand on the exact same plane.
You expose your vital organs, you wrap your arms around the other person. It requires absolute mutual vulnerability.
It is the physical manifestation of equality and shared joy. And what is so striking to me is that the classical scholars chose to locate the invention of the hug, which is really the baseline physical gesture of human empathy, in a cave in the Levant, immediately following this brutal realization about the isolating nature of divine love.
It grounds these massive kind of abstract theological concepts in real grit and muscle.
It does. It humanizes the prophets immensely.
And speaking of grit, these texts do not shy away from the harsh realities of survival. While Abraham is painted as the contemplative, empathetic friend of God in that cave, these same sources portray him and the other prophets as highly tactical problem solvers.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we often get stuck in that peaceful shepherd trope,
Right, the guy sitting under a tree praying. The classical scholars had zero interest in passive prophets. They needed these figures to be active managers of chaos.
Active managers of chaos. That's a great way to put it.
Take the narrative of Abraham as a military innovator. When a local ruler, who's referred to as the king of the mountain, captures Abraham's nephew, Lot, Abraham doesn't just retreat to a cave to pray for his release.
No, he mobilizes. He goes full action hero.
He really does.
The text specifies he gathers exactly 313 men and marches out to the plain of Yafir near Barza in Damascus. But he doesn't just mindlessly charge the enemy. The source explicitly claims Abraham invented a brand new military strategy right on the spot.
Yes.
He organized his men into a center, a right flank, and a left flank.
Which, in the context of ancient warfare, was revolutionary. But we also have to decode that number, 313.
Oh, right.
For the medieval Islamic audience reading these texts, that number is electric.
Why is that?
Because 3 and 13 is the exact number of soldiers Prophet Muhammad commanded at the pivotal Battle of Badr centuries later.
Oh, wow, that is fascinating. So the authors are kind of retroactively weaving Abraham's tactical genius into the military DNA of their own era.
Precisely. They are establishing this lineage of divine military strategy that originates right there in the Levant. Abraham successfully uses this new flanking maneuver. He routs the enemy king, and he recovers his people.
So faith, in the context of these histories, does not negate the need for infantry organization.
Not at all. You still have to do the work.
And that theme of divine mission colliding with brutal logistical reality is pushed to the absolute limit in the stories surrounding Moses and the Exodus.
Oh, the Exodus logistics are unparalleled.
I mean, moving an entire population through an unforgiving desert environment for 40 years, that is a supply chain nightmare.
The Israelites' complaints in the text are profoundly mundane, which is actually what makes them so authentic.
Right, they aren't having high-level theological debates in the desert.
Exactly. They are experiencing continuous divine miracles, yet their primary concerns are caloric intake, thermal regulation, and material decay.
Let's look at how the texts detail this divine supply chain, because it's so specific. When the people demand bread, they are given manna. But the text doesn't just leave it as some vague, glowing, mystical substance.
No, it gives a recipe, basically.
It categorizes it as a thin, flat bread resembling fine flour. And then when they demand meat, the wind delivers sawa, specifically described as a fat bird resembling a quail or pigeon.
So their nutritional baseline is completely secured. But the environmental logistics are where the text gets highly inventive.
Yeah, the people ask Moses, hey, how are we supposed to see at night? And how do we survive the daytime heat?
Real concerns in a desert.
Valid questions. And the text says a pillar of light was placed in the center of the camp, and clouds were constantly deployed over them. It's essentially a localized, mobile microclimate tracking the camp across the desert.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it demonstrates the immense administrative burden on Moses. He is managing the most complicated refugee camp in human history. He's constantly mediating between the infinite power of the divine and the finite, really exhausting reality of human biology.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, though. The detail that really stuck with me is the clothing.
The growing clothes.
Yes. The people ask Moses what happens to their shoes over 4 decades and what they are supposed to do about their growing children.
Because kids grow fast, and they have no textile mills.
Exactly. The text claims the leather of their shoes suffered zero material decay, like the laws of entropy were locally suspended for footwear. But for the children, the text states their clothes biologically grew alongside them.
The fabric adapted and expanded in real time.
I always try to map this onto modern engineering, right? If you were designing a multi-generational Mars mission today, you can pack modular habitats, you can recycle water, but you cannot pack enough varying sizes of clothing for children who haven't been born yet, growing at unpredictable rates over decades without any supply drops.
It's an impossible math problem.
It is. So the divine solution of growing fabric is essentially smart material technology conceptualized thousands of years ago to solve a very strict logistical bottleneck.
It proves that these texts are deeply concerned with the how, not just the what. They don't just say God provided, they explain the mechanics of the provision.
Right.
And sometimes the logistical burden isn't just about the future of the children, it's about the literal dead weight of the past.
You're talking about the bones of Joseph.
Yes, this is a crucial story. Moses is prepared to initiate the exodus from Egypt, but he is legally and spiritually bound by a promise made generations prior.
A promise to Joseph.
Right. Joseph had made the Israelites swear they would not leave his remains in Egypt. So Moses cannot forge the future without physically hauling the past out with him.
But nobody knows where Joseph is buried.
Exactly. The knowledge has been lost.
Clock is ticking, the Egyptian army is a massive threat, and dawn is approaching. Moses finally locates an old woman who holds the historical knowledge of the burial site.
And she's brilliant. She uses this leverage to negotiate her own salvation, forcing Moses to promise her a place in the Exodus alongside him in paradise.
She is a master tactician in her own right. She leverages the past for a ticket to the future.
She really does.
So she leads Moses out to the Nile River, But because dawn is breaking, Moses prays and asks God to delay the sunrise.
Which is a massive ask.
He literally asks to pause the rotation of the cosmos, so he has time to fulfill a promise to a dead man.
And God grants it.
Yeah, and then the old woman points into the water and reveals that Joseph isn't buried in the dirt. His remains are encased in a massive marble box, a sarcophagus, sunk at the bottom of the Nile.
The imagery there is just unbelievable. The greatest prophet of his era, lying in a marble box beneath the flowing waters of the longest river in the world. It's deeply evocative.
It really is. And Moses extracts this massive weight from the water. Just imagine the sheer physical effort of that.
It would take a whole team.
They are fleeing for their lives. The Egyptian army is breathing down their necks, and they are hauling a waterlogged, solid marble sarcophagus through the desert.
It is the ultimate metaphor for historical continuity. The past in the Levant, in these texts, is never merely prologue. It is an active, heavy participant in the present. You have to carry it with you.
And as we transition deeper into these sources, we see that this imperative to carry the past forward eventually collides with the ultimate future.
The end of days.
Exactly. Because the Levant isn't just where these foundational stories happen. According to these scholars, the Levant is the exact designated site where human history is scheduled to terminate.
The texts explicitly label the region as the land of Mashar and Manshar.
Meaning the gathering and the resurrection.
Right. The physical geography we have been discussing up to this point transforms from a historical stage into a full-blown apocalyptic theater.
And the central antagonist of this final act is the Dajjal, the Antichrist figure.
Yes. And the sequences describing the Dajjal are terrifying because his power isn't just military force, it is entirely psychological. He operates through a concept you mentioned in the research called istidraj.
Let's define istidraj for the listener, because it's key to everything that happens next.
Istidraj is a crucial theological mechanism. It basically refers to a divine deception or a test where God intentionally grants overwhelming supernatural power to a tyrant, specifically to test the faith of the believers.
So the villain is given actual miracles to perform.
Exactly. The Dajjal is permitted to control the weather, he can command the earth to produce crops on a whim, and most terrifyingly, he can resurrect the dead.
Which brings us back to that horrific scene we opened the deep dive with. The Dajjal arrives in Jerusalem, and a believer referred to as a warner steps out to confront him, publicly calling him the imposter.
He's incredibly brave.
And the Dajjal subjects this man to the ultimate display of istidraj. He has him sawed in half, walks between the pieces, and resurrects him.
The tyrant assumes that empirical visual evidence of power over life and death will instantly command worship. I mean, how could you not bow to someone who just brought you back from the dead?
Right. But the believer uses the miracle itself as proof of the fraud. He says, "I am now absolutely certain you are the imposter."
It is a profound triumph of internal conviction over sensory manipulation.
It really is.
Because the Dajjal's entire empire relies on a monopoly of truth through sensory dominance. Believe what I show you. When the believer rejects the evidence of his own eyes in favor of prophetic warning, the Dajjal's entire power structure just shatters.
It breaks his spell.
Exactly. And in a panic, the Dajjal attempts to kill the believer again. But the text states God transforms the believer's skin into plates of solid copper. Safai min nahas.
He becomes physically invulnerable. The tyrant's ultimate weapon, the threat of death, just evaporates.
It's an incredible image of spiritual resilience becoming literal physical armor. And this resistance is occurring against the backdrop of two ancient undying prophets racing across the landscape.
Elias and Eliasa.
Yes. They are granted supernatural speed, literally outrunning the Dajjal's advancing forces from town to town, screaming warnings to the populace.
It's like a high-stakes apocalyptic chase scene. And the geopolitical map of this apocalypse is incredibly specific in the texts.
It maps out the safe zones.
Right. The Dajjal attempts to enter Mecca, but the text says the Archangel Michael physically barricades it.
A literal angel blocking the city limits.
Yeah. And then he marches on Medina, but the Archangel Gabriel seals the perimeter there. So the grand sanctuaries of the Arabian Peninsula are locked down, which actively funnels the entire conflict directly north into the Levant.
And the climax occurs at the Gate of Lud in modern-day Palestine.
The resistance is basically starving in the mountains by this point. The text describes this sudden, overwhelming illumination of the earth, and Jesus, the son of Mary, descends.
The physical presence of Jesus is the counter to the Dajjal's illusion. The texts describe the physical constitution of the Dajjal, reacting viscerally to the presence of Jesus.
It's a very visceral description.
The tyrant literally begins to dissolve. He melts like salt in water, fleeing in terror until Jesus intercepts him at the gate of Lud.
And the destruction of the Dajjal ushers in a highly specific apocalyptic aftermath, right? It's described as a 40-year era of profound unnatural peace.
Yes, the texts claim disease and death cease entirely during this period.
What fascinates me is the geography of this peace. This post-apocalyptic Eden, this 40-year suspension of all human suffering.
Right.
It takes place on the exact same soil where Cain committed the first murder.
It is a deliberate narrative closure. The classical scholars are showing us that the geological ledger is finally balanced. The earth that drank the first blood of Abel now hosts the final peace of humanity.
It's a complete circle. But we have to note, the earth in these texts is hypersensitive. It violently rejects injustice long before that final peace is ever achieved.
Oh, definitely.
Which brings us to the visceral haunting of Levant involving John the Baptist, or as he's known in the Islamic tradition, Yahya.
Yahya's execution by a corrupt ruler is a pivotal trauma in the history of Damascus. And the classical texts refuse to let the murder be a mere historical footnote. They physicalize the grief.
Yeah, the text details that after Yahya was killed, his blood didn't just absorb into the dirt like normal. It pooled and it began to boil. It violently bubbled out of the earth.
The land itself was physically allergic to the injustice.
Exactly.
It is a supernatural manifestation of unavenged morality. When the invading king, Nebuchadnezzar, arrives later and sees this anomaly, he demands an explanation.
Right, he sees boiling blood in the middle of the sea.
And upon learning it is the blood of a murdered prophet, he attempts to appease the earth through sheer brutality.
The source claims Nebuchadnezzar slaughtered 70,000 people over that exact spot until the blood finally settled and stopped boiling.
The sheer scale of that slaughter highlights a very grim reality in these texts. The earth demands a balancing of the scales, but human tyrants can only balance scales with more blood.
It's a horrific cycle.
It is, and the haunting of Yahya persists for centuries after that. During the Umayyad Caliphate, Caliph al-Walid begins excavating the center of Damascus to construct the Great Mosque.
Right on top of this deeply traumatized soil.
Exactly. His workers breach a hidden underground chamber. Al-Walid descends into this tiny 3x3 cubit room with a candle.
Creepy.
Very. And he discovers a small box. Inside the box is a basket containing the perfectly preserved severed head of Yahya, complete with an identifying inscription.
So the past is just waiting for them down there. What does Al-Walid do?
Al-Walid orders the head to be left exactly where it is, but he orders a pillar to be constructed over it so the populace knows what lies beneath the marble floors of their shiny new mosque.
Wow. It proves that in Sham, you cannot build the future without literally paving over the bleeding wounds of the past.
This raises an important question, though. What happens to the human psychology of a region when everyone knows they are standing on a geological ledger of miracles?
Yeah, when you know there are 500 prophets buried under your feet.
Exactly. It creates a massive vulnerability in the population.
Because it creates a highly lucrative market for exploitation. The soil that bleeds for profits inevitably breeds false ones. Which brings us to this amazing Umayyad true crime thriller of Al-Harith the Liar.
Yes. To understand Al-Harith's threat, we really have to understand the geopolitical and theological climate of the Umayyad Caliphate at the time. The empire was wrestling with the Qadariya theological crisis.
The debate over free will versus predestination.
Exactly. But it wasn't just a dry philosophical debate in a classroom, it was an existential political threat.
How so?
Well, the Umayyad caliphs heavily promoted predestination. They argued, God placed us in power, therefore whatever we do is God's will. Rebellions against us are rebellions against God.
Convenient theology for a ruler.
Very convenient. But the Qadariya argued for human free will, which meant the caliphs were actually making their own choices and could therefore be held accountable by the people for their tyranny.
So what does this all mean? When the classical texts group the Qadariya together with plagues, they aren't just complaining about rival theologians. They are describing an existential contagion to the political stability of the empire.
Exactly. And into this highly volatile powder keg steps Al-Harith. He doesn't just declare himself a prophet. He meticulously constructs this aesthetic of unassailable piety.
The text notes that if he wore a robe of pure gold, it would somehow look like the rough garments of an ascetic.
He weaponizes humility.
He does. And he backs it up with these localized, highly curated miracles. He taps marble tiles in the mosque, and they seem to sing praises to God. He produces fresh summer fruit for his followers in the dead of winter.
Whether it was ventriloquism, sleight of hand, or leveraging ancient smuggling routes to get the fruit, he completely dominates the sensory environment of his targets.
And crucially, he targets the hyper-devout. He isolates the most spiritually hungry men in the mosque, forces them into terrifying oaths of secrecy, and slowly builds a massive militant cult operating out of a hidden compound in Jerusalem.
It's the classic playbook. Isolate the followers, create an us versus them mentality, use some sleight of hand, and suddenly you have a private army. And this isn't a minor nuisance to the empire.
No. When the Umayyad Caliph, Abd al-Malik, hears al-Harith's name, the text says the caliph literally throws himself off his throne in panic.
The most powerful man in the Islamic Empire is terrified of a man doing parlor tricks in Jerusalem.
Because Abd al-Malik understands that in the Levant, theological power instantly translates into kinetic political power. A man who controls the unquestioning zealotry of thousands in the Holy City can absolutely topple an empire.
So dismantling this cult requires an incredibly sophisticated sting operation.
A medieval undercover op.
Exactly. And this is executed by a man from Basra, Iraq. He travels to Jerusalem, he infiltrates the cult, and he sits through al-Harith's beautiful, mesmerizing sermons.
But the Basra man recognizes the manipulation immediately.
He does, but he plays the long game. He feigns skepticism at first, then returns days later claiming to have been spiritually conquered by al-Harith's words. He becomes a double agent.
He embeds himself deeply into the inner circle, mapping the escape routes and learning the operational security of the compound. Then, under the guise of traveling back to Basra to recruit more followers, he goes directly to Caliph Abd al-Malik's camp.
The caliph is desperate, so he gives him a blank check to capture the false prophet. And the Basra man's tactical requests really reveal his genius here. He doesn't ask for the caliph's elite Arab guards.
Right. What does he ask for?
He asks for 40 soldiers from Fergana in Central Asia.
Men who do not speak a single word of Arabic.
The ultimate countermeasure. The Basra man knows al-Harith's primary weapon is his beautiful, persuasive rhetoric. By deploying soldiers who literally cannot understand the language, he completely neutralizes the false prophet's psychological warfare.
That is brilliant. The sting itself is brilliantly orchestrated, too. The Basra man coordinates with the governor of Jerusalem to confiscate every single candle in the city.
A total blackout operation.
Yeah, he distributes them to men positioned at every dark alley and escape route surrounding the compound. In the dead of night, the Basra man knocks on the compound door, claiming he just couldn't bear to be away from the prophet.
And the moment the guard opens the door, the Basra man yells the signal. Thousands of candles are lit simultaneously. The text says Jerusalem became as bright as day.
The 40 Fergana soldiers storm the compound. They drag al-Harith out of a secret compartment where he was hiding. And in a desperate final maneuver, al-Harith attempts to play the victim.
He uses his voice one last time.
Right, he recites the Quran beautifully and cries out, "Will you kill a man just for saying my Lord is God?"
But the linguistic firewall holds.
It does. The Fergana soldiers look at him in total confusion. They reply in broken Arabic, "This is our Quran, bring your own Quran."
The psychological manipulation just shatters against a language barrier. Al-Harith is hauled to Damascus and executed.
It is a stunning true crime narrative. But it really exposes the massive paradox of the Levant in these classical texts.
Yes.
The authors revere this land. They explicitly state over 500 prophets are buried in Damascus alone.
Yes.
Yet they simultaneously record Hadith's warning that God placed counterfeit and falseness directly into Sham.
It proved these medieval scholars were not simply writing blind utopian propaganda. They were sophisticated sociologists in a way. They understood that extreme holiness acts as a magnifying glass for human nature.
It amplifies everything.
Right, it amplifies the highest spiritual resilience, like the believer with the copper skin standing up to the Dajjal, but it simultaneously attracts the most aggressive charlatans and tyrants, like al-Harith.
The Holy Land isn't a place where humans magically become perfect. It is the arena where human imperfections, deceptions, and logistical failures are played out with cosmic stakes.
Which is exactly why these classical texts remain so compelling today. They force you to evaluate the unseen geography of your own life.
We have covered an immense expanse of that geography today. I mean, we analyzed the origin of human empathy with an 18-cubit giant. We mapped the gritty, smart fabric logistics of Moses surviving the desert. And we tracked the unavenged boiling blood of Yahya beneath the Umayyad Mosque.
We covered a lot of ground.
We watched the ultimate triumph of critical thinking against the Dajjal's sensory deception, and we broke down the psychological sting operation that took down al-Harith the liar.
And in every single one of those narratives, the physical Earth is intimately involved. It isn't just a passive stage, it is actively recording everything.
Which leaves us with one final haunting detail from these prophecies. When the texts describe the absolute end of the world, when the earth is finally ruined and humanity's time is completely up, they claim that the buildings and the land of Damascus will remain standing for exactly 40 years after everything else has collapsed.
A solitary monument at the end of time.
I really want you, the listener, to just sit with that image. Imagine a geography uniquely blessed to outlive the end of the world, but uniquely burdened with having to stand alone and bear witness to the absolute silence of it all.
It's heavy.
It completely redefines what it means to be a sanctuary. The next time you look at a map or you stand in a place heavy with history, ask yourself, what is this ground recording, and what will it remember when everything else is gone? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the classical texts of the Levant. We will see you next time.